Some men are nice and some men are more crazy than the good Lord would care to admit. Welcome to my book. It was actually written by a man named Willy Billy, but I slit his bum and puked out his bones. They're my books now. Please sit back and enjoy this lovely tale of fantasy and truth. This is the second book in the Toadfarts trilogy. The Garth Brown Mysteries, Toadfarts. Book 2, FZQ4U7VK. Chapter 1, Garth Brown's Peculiarity. Garth Brown sat hunched on his bookshelf. This was the only place his foster family, the Hooker family, would let him sleep. It was very uncomfortable, and for 21 hours per day he had to cram his body onto the top shelf in this hunched position. He slept like this, he ate like this, he pooped like this. It was nearing the end of summer. Garth was waiting impatiently to get back to his studies at Toadfarts, the school for detective wizardry. His 3 hours of freedom each day were spent practicing his sneaking by creeping into the kitchen and nipping at the ankles of his big stepbrothers, Boomquarf, Blob, and Grunkishmat. Sometimes the big brutes would bully him by taking off their gloves and slapping him across the bum. They wore gloves often and Garth thought it was weird, but the slapping he could abide by on the condition that he gave verbal consent. It was still very inconvenient. Garth often thought about the disturbing dream he had had the previous year at Toadfarts. Was the evil one coming back to kill him? Why him? Or was it him? Which him? Or who him is him? No, thought Garth. Suddenly, a large pig charged towards the house, oinking loudly. Oink, oink, oink. The pig arrived at Garth's feet and Garth patted the pig on the head. "Hello, brother pig. How's the family?" Garth said to provoke himself a little bit. He noticed an envelope pinned in the pig's butt cheeks and cut the pig's head off instantly. He grabbed the envelope and rushed upstairs to read it. Once he was comfortable hunched into his usual top-shelf position, he opened the envelope with his teeth and read. Dear Garth. It has been a long summer indeed. 2 months have passed since the day we last embraced. I miss the friendship we had and I hope that I will always be your little Frizzy. My parents are well. I have asked them to provide me with 3 more siblings, but their marriage seems to be going downhill, so I've asked the zebra next door to advise them to prevent a divorce. Please come to my home and we shall prepare for school. Yours in haste. Frizzy. P.S. I found enough dead bodies for all of us. Garth scoffed and snarled. How could Frizzy be so foolish to think a zebra could help with a struggling hedgehog marriage? The truth was that Garth was very lonesome and he missed Frizzy very much. He was however happy to have an excuse to leave the shelf early, and so he packed his bags and his toys. Chapter 2, Frizzy, Man of Mystery. I'm going to Frizzy's home. Garth screamed at his stepfather, Droopin. Droopin was not pleased with this, and so he pulled out a large cannon and aimed it fiercely at Garth's eyes and shot him in the head. Garth simply laughed and zoomed off on his brand new rollerblades. Once he arrived at Frizzy's home, he noticed the hedgehog parents were not on speaking terms. However, Mommy Hedgehog smiled gracefully when she saw him. Frizzy rolled out of the bushes. Come to my room and play games with me. The 2 boys spent the whole afternoon playing by curious. Garth was curious about everything, and Frizzy didn't have a curious organ in his intermolecular anatomy, and so Garth won every round handedly. The next few days at Frizzy's home were spent cleaning the pots and sewing the drapes. Frizzy was very worried about his parents' situation and wanted to make sure the house was in tip-top shape before he left for his second year of detective wizardry school. Frizzy, do you ever fantasize about some of the older schoolboys at Toadfarts? asked Garth curiously. In what way do you mean? Said Frizzy as he gave Garth a little tickle on the belly. Garth did not respond to this but just giggled and ran away. Frizzy chased after him and thus, the game of run and blush began. This was a game Frizzy and Garth created where they would chase each other through the hills. Whoever started blushing first lost and had to let the other pull a mean prank on them. Garth won the first round and so he plucked a chicken and tricked Frizzy into tickling himself with the feathers by telling him he had ticklish spiders on his feet. Frizzy won the second round and convinced Garth that he was dead and that he had been brought back to life as a mountain goose. Once the two boys became exhausted, they returned to Frizzy's little home and found Daddy Hedgehog huffing and puffing and packing a suitcase and Mommy Hedgehog squealing. "What is wrong, Daddy Hedgehog?" cried Frizzy. "The game is afoot," murmured Daddy Hedgehog. "Wonderful!" yelled Garth joyously. And the two boys and Daddy Hedgehog were off. Chapter 3: A Traitorous Journey. The two boys and Daddy Hedgehog trudged along through the marshes for several days. Poor Daddy Hedgehog's feet became so cold that he could no longer walk and so Frizzy and Garth left him for dead. "Here you go, Dad. You can have one of my socks and this smelly raisin I found in the folds of my skin," Frizzy said encouragingly. The two boys continued their journey through thick and thin until they eventually made it to the bus station where they met a very large and hairy man named Huggard. Huggard was a very large man named Huggard. Huggard threw out his arms and his yellow eyes pierced Garth's heart like two double-bladed spears. Huggard was obviously very pleased to see these two boys. "Hi boys. I am Huggard. I have been hired by Professor Bumliscorf to be your first spiritual divisor." "Our spiritual what?" asked Garth curiously. "Why, your spiritual divisor of course. Don't tell me you don't know what that is?" The two boys stared blankly at Huggard and proceeded to abandon him as they made their way to the bus and leapt in through the bus tubes. On the way up the tube, Garth's face slammed into the bottom of a boy his own age and he could hear muffled yelling. Garth became furious. "Oh yay! Spread your legs and clear a path for me!" Garth yelled into the boy's bum. Unfortunately, the boy could not hear Garth clearly and all he heard was "Oh. Rear your eggs and clear a path for me." The boy proceeded to lay an egg in Garth's face. Garth spat out the egg right back into the boy's bum. The boy was so shocked by the sudden penetration that he burst from the tube and allowed Garth and Frizzy to enter the bus. Garth and Frizzy tumbled up the tubes and into the bus and presented themselves to all the other children with outstretched arms and a beautiful harmony. They then proceeded towards their seats and began to snack on some goat tongues and goblins' toenails. As they snacked and chewed, they heard a mighty ruckus coming towards them down the aisle on the bus. "Oi, Byhauser. That's the boy who done spats a chicken's fetus right up between my pillows down under. You mean yo butts holes, trickshaws? Yes, Byhauser. Right up my drain pipes." The two strange boys slowly approached. They were only about 12, the same age as Garth and Frizzy, but they each had the most beautiful moustaches one could imagine. The two boys were like twins, except for Trickshaws had a beautiful blonde head of hair and moustache, and Byhauser had a rich and beautiful shade of brown which seemed to gleam with curls and pride. Garth and Frizzy watched the two boys drawing closer and closer. Once they reached Garth and Frizzy, they sprang into action. Trickshaws and Byhauser drew out their finger pistols and stood back to back, looking ever so menacing. "You take the left one, I'll take the handsome one." At that moment, Garth and Frizzy looked at each other in shock. They didn't know the difference between left and right and they couldn't imagine which one of them was more handsome than the other. In all the confusion they leapt into each other's arms and Frizzy picked up Garth and swung him by the ankles like a slingshot right at Trickshaws and Byhauser. This created such a fuss that Professor McNoggins came bursting from the front of the bus to break up the fight. By the time Professor McNoggins got there however, all four boys were so covered in poop and mucus that it was impossible to tell where one boy ended and the other began. Professor McNoggins was a very strict disciplinarian who to this point in his career had frightened 18 children to the grave. "Now, boys. It is essential that we maintain order and discipline in our school. Without these, we cannot hope to keep criminals off our hallowed grounds. In order to settle this, we must arrange a gentleman's battle between the four of you in the gladiators' arena at Toadfarts on the 4th day. But it wasn't our fault. Feed these good-for-nothing moustache men to the lions, cried Garth. If you fight to kill or suffer together. That is my motto, replied Professor McNoggins with a giggle and a chickle. He then pulled out a large chain and chained the four boys to the back end of the bus so that they were dragged the rest of the way to the school. Chapter 4, Return to Hogwarts. Finally, the bus came to a hunky and squeaky halt at the front gates to the grounds of Toadfarts. All the boys and girls exited the bus and Garth, Frizzy, Trickshaws and Byhouser were left tied and dangling from their chains, barely clinging on to life. Soon enough, Professor McNoggins came to unchain them. I think perhaps you have paid your dues. The next time, however, you will face each other in a battle to the death in the arena. Do I make myself clear? Yes, quite clear, said Frizzy. Garth continued to snarl at Trickshaws and Byhouser and they spat on the ground in Garth's direction, but each of the boys knew this was not the time or place for revenge. Trickshaws and Byhouser proceeded to the castle holding hands and shooting at the other boys and girls with finger pistols. What strange boys those are! Exclaimed Garth as he and Frizzy pressed butts together and shuffled in this position towards the castle. Garth, I've been thinking. Do you suppose it's normal for a boy like me to have parents like mine? Garth hesitated. He knew that Frizzy's real parents were dead and that those hedgehogs he thought were his parents were simply Bumbliscorp's replacements. Frizzy, every family is a little bit different. My foster family shoots me sometimes, but it doesn't bother me. Do you see what I'm saying? Yes, I think so, replied Frizzy, but Garth could tell he was still in deep thought. I don't feel like seeing anyone tonight. Do you mind if we go straight to bed and snuggle? Asked Frizzy. Yes, I would like that very much after the day we've had. Just please, do not allow your butt swass to soak up the sheets again, pleaded Garth. Soon, the two boys were snuggled up in a ball with Garth's legs wrapped around Frizzy's waist and Frizzy's arms folded up around Garth's head. Frizzy had fallen to sleep instantly and was snoring, but Garth's face was deeply planted in Frizzy's chest and he was lost in thought. He couldn't help but think of the dream he had had the last time he slept in the castle, where he saw a dark and wicked figure calling his toad minions to arms. It had seemed so real at the time. Could it be that the dark figure was the evil Fartamort? Was he calling his toad army back? No. The toad statues were still standing all around the castle. And they were solid stone. Garth giggled and knew it was silly to be so worried. He soon dozed off. The next morning, Garth awoke to find Frizzy hustling to get ready for Professor Bumbliscorp's first address of the new term. Get up, Garth. The speech is in 5 minutes. It's 2:55 in the morning already. By golly, it was. Garth quickly leapt into his garments and the two boys raced down to the main hall. As they entered the large and beautiful hall, Garth noticed Trickshaws and Byhouser across the room and they seemed to be torturing a first year. Garth's blood began to boil and tingle, but he proceeded to his seat at the table alongside Frizzy. Soon, a donkey entered the hall and slowly transformed into the colorful and exotic gypsy in charge of sorting first years into their units. Garth paid little to no attention to this process and became distracted by poking Frizzy with his fork all over his body. Suddenly, he noticed the small first year who had been getting tortured by the dynamic duo, Trickshaws and Byhouser, was being announced as the first sneaker in the group of first years. The boy was battered and bruised from top to bottom as he made his way to a seat across from Garth. Garth rose to his feet and saluted the boy as he arrived. "Oh yay, what's your name?" asked Frizzy. The boy was very shy and intimidated, but he slowly stuttered out the words I am Albinus Altromant, replied the boy. "My name is Frizzy. This is my husband, Garth." Garth said no words, but stood proudly and said no words. "You're not old enough to have a husband," said Albinus Saltromant. "Don't tell me what I can and cannot do." Frizzy replied. Now, Frizzy. This young boy cannot hope to have fully grasped what it means to be a sneaker. It is only his first year. Garth said as he came out of his own mind's closet. "Albinus. May I call you Anus?" Garth asked. I'd rather you didn't." "Anus it is. Frizzy, please give our little Anus here a scrub. He's looking a bit bruised and bloody." Frizzy proceeded to remove his shirt and soak it in vinegar he had found on the table and scrubbed little Anus very very hard. "Welcome, welcome, welcome," said an old and oily voice from the head table. It was time for Professor Bumbleiscoff's first address. A special welcome to first years, and also to those for whom this will be their last year at Toadfarts. Some due to death and other mishaps, and graduation for those who survive. As some of you may be aware, the last year at Toadfarts holds many dangers for senior students. Many will die and those that survive will excel as the world's new wizard detectives. All the students cheered loudly and Garth stuck his fingers in his ears. Garth didn't like loud noises unless they came from his own body. Bumbleiscord pulled a whip from under his garments and lashed out at the students and hustled them off to begin their classes. Garth hustled his little body towards his first class of the semester. He was now a second-year student, so that meant he had to take disguiseology with Professor Dopo. As Garth ran feverishly down the corridors, he tripped and fell down a side passage that was only used by the janitor. He rolled and tumbled and only stopped when his bum started to itch. Garth opened his eyes and was horrified. He was in Stephen, the poltergeist slayer. Stephen was a poltergeist named Stephen who loved to torment little children that attended Toadfarts. Just last year, Garth had a run-in with Stephen and he was still scared of him to this day. Garth quickly sprung to his toes and began to claw back up the passage. However, Stephen had heard Garth tumble down and was much too quick for Garth. Hee, screeched Stephen, "I see you have come down for some fun," the ghost said as he ran his stone-cold arms through Garth's stomach, which caused a ruckus within Garth's tummy. Hello Stephen. I just had a little whoopsie but I will be on my way now," said Garth nervously. "Not so quick, Garth. You have come to my home and now you must play a game with me," said Stephen the poltergeist. "Or else?" asked Garth. "Or else what?" replied Stephen. "Or what? Excuse me?" No, come play." Garth was very confused and frightened, so he agreed to a game. "If I play with you, you must let me go back to my classes," said Garth. "Oh foo. Come on now, just one game and you will be fine," said Stephen. "Which game shall we play today? Let me think. Yes, I know." The ghost stopped speaking and twirled around in the air. "We shall play kiss or pinch." "You say what?" asked Garth, blushing. He did not want Stephen to think he liked kissing other boys, so he quickly pulled off his shoes and positioned them over each of his cheeks. "Pinch or kiss. This is how the game works. I say something to you, if you cannot figure out what I am talking about, then I get to pinch you on the bum. However, if you get it right, then I have to kiss you on the bum." Garth hesitated and thought about the game. Either way he would be putting his bum in an uncomfortable situation. However, he knew he needed to get out and he was missing his class. "Okay. Fine," Garth said. "All right. Here I go. It is neither small nor round. It is hairy but not too scary. It can be found on some boys and most men but no women." "What is it?" asked the poltergeist with a twisted smile on his cold lifeless face. Garth started to sweat frantically. He didn't want to lose this game. A pinch in the bum from a ghost was something Garth always had feared. In fact, it was the one thing he had always been scared of since a young age. What could it possibly be? Not small or round. On boys and men. I suppose I could search my body high and low. Garth was whispering to himself, but now he was starting to panic. He began sliding his arms and fingers all throughout his pants and torso. As Garth grabbed, poked, wiggled, tiggled and figgled every inch of his body, he suddenly stopped. As if a light bulb had lit up every inch of his intracranial molecular gyrus, he leapt towards Stephen. "Is it the bum crack?" "Garth, you dirty boy. It is not an intergluteal cleft," replied Stephen the poltergeist as he started snorting. "Then, what is it?" "It is a beard, Garth. Now bend over and let me pinch your little bum." Garth did as the ghost said and bent over. Stephen leaned in with his ghostly fingers and pinched Garth's bum so hard that Garth screamed and sprinted back up the passageway. Garth emerged back in the corridor. Frizzy just so happened to be going to the bathroom and the two crossed paths. "Hey, you alright?" asked Frizzy as he noticed Garth had been crying. Garth did not reply but rather grabbed Frizzy by the hand and led him back into Professor Dopo's classroom. "You were late," yelled Dopo at the top of his lungs. Professor Dopo was a banana-shaped man with a large forehead and little to no skin on his face. He was very skinny but his voice was deeper than the ocean. "I am so sorry," said Garth bowing. Professor Dopo said it was alright, however Garth insisted for the most severe punishment. Garth's punishment consisted of cleaning the poop chutes and scrubbing the bowls. "School sucks here," said Garth as he scrubbed the last bowl. Just then, a small whistle was heard directly to his left. Garth perked up and crawled towards the sound. He hastened himself to a large blouse and positioned his lips. "Who goes there?" asked Garth. There was no response. Instead, Garth heard a frog hop from one end of the dark corners to another. The bowls were very dark and hot. Garth licked his brow and swooned into deep thought. "What have I gotten myself into?" he thought. "Why did I insist on the worst punishment?" The truth was that insisting on the worst punishment may not have been the wisest move. Apart from cleaning the bowels, he was also expected to fight off a fire-pooping dragon that had crept into the darkness. Suddenly, the fire-pooping dragon leapt from the dark corner and exposed himself to Garth. "Oh yay, what's that then?" Garth said curiously. He killed the dragon and finished cleaning just in time for supper. Just then Garth awoke. He had been dreaming the entire time, he was still with Stephen. "All right. I pinched your bum. Now you can leave," said Stephen the poltergeist. Garth gathered his thoughts and went back up to class. Chapter 5, The Hint Among the Shadow. Garth was still a bit embarrassed about his night with Stephen. He was very confused about what he had dreamt and what had actually happened. He tightened his belt and rose from his sleeping bag. He looked to his left and saw Frizzy fighting another boy. Garth motioned for Frizzy to leave the fight and come follow him. "I had a bad dream again, Frizzy," said Garth. "I tell you, there is weird things going on and I don't like it." "What do you mean, Garth?" asked Frizzy. "I just can feel it. All this stuff about Fatima art, and my parents and the toads. I just think I am connected somehow and I don't like it," said Garth as he bent his knee over his neck and touched his toes. "Why do you do stuff like that?" asked Frizzy. "Frizzy, everything I does has a purpose," replied Garth. "Do you think your dreams are because of a connection to fart and ought?" asked Frizzy. "Yes, I think we share a commonality of sorts. Maybe I killed his parents in a past life? Impossible. Previous lives aren't proven by science," Frizzy said. He was a staunch defender of science. "I think I ought to go and speak with Professor Bumblescorf about my dreams. Goodbye, Frizzy. You may now kill that other child," Garth said as he raced out of the room and up to Bumblescorf's chambers. Garth stormed up to the professor's quarters and banged on the door. "Just a minute. I'm naked," replied the professor's old wispy voice. Garth waited for 1 minute and then the door swung open. Professor Bumblescorf stood in the doorway completely naked holding a candle in each hand. "Come in, Garth," he said. Garth was very uncomfortable but breathed twice through his nose and then entered the professor's office. "Take a load off, Garth. What I am about to show you is very important and it requires there to be no distractions." The professor paused and blew out both candles. The room was now completely dark. "Garth, what you are about to see next has no guarantees. It may be beautiful, however it may be dark and hold upon your breast a heavy task. Are you ready? Asked the professor. Professor, you are scaring me and I am very confused, replied Garth. The reason you came to see me, Gareth, is no coincidence, replied the professor with a dark twinkle in his eye. Come here, Garth. I need you to closely observe my body. See if you can find the obscenity. Professor Bumblescorf said. Garth did not hesitate. He flung towards Bumblescorf and patted down the old professor high and low. He soon found a large lump in an unknown crevice in the professor's folds. Professor, what is that? Years ago, when Lord Fartamort was at the peak of his glory, I performed a great ritual along with many of my fellow great wizard detectives. This is what ended Lord Fartamort's reign of terror over the people of Earth. This is no magic or druidic ritual, but one that we learned through studies of the ancient wizard detectives who had contrived their powers from the stars of heaven. In order to disguise these powers, the truth about the first wizard detective Merlin was disguised throughout history as myth. Go on. Garth said. Anyway, we were able to end the reign of Lord Fartamort by means of this ancient ritual. This lump, however, is a sign that the power of the ritual in question is beginning to weaken. I too am growing weaker by the day. I'm afraid I must ask something of you that is beyond your age of wisdom and understanding. Bumblescorf, come on. I have my wits, Garth said in a grunt. I must ask you to go into the mountains and return to me a flask of the legendary milk of the Bootwomps. This will help to keep Lord Fartamort at bay for a short time at least. You may take friends with you for assistance, but the mountains hold many dangers. Do not choose your help unwisely. Bumblescorf put on a robe and asked Garth to blow out his candle. Garth approached and blew out his candle and raced out the door. Chapter 6, Off to the lands of the Bootwomps and the dangers therein. Garth barged into Frizzy's evidence tampering class and threw a small pebble at the teacher's head, knocking him out instantly. He beckoned to Frizzy to follow him into the corridor. Garth, what is this all about? I was just going to learn how to identify a criminal by his poop. Tut tut. Frizzy, we have been given a mission. A mission? From what to where and to whom thereafter? Replied Frizzy. Bumblescorf has a lump in his crevice and we have to go get him some Bootwomp milk to maintain the powers of the ritual. Garth blurted out as he panted for breath. I see. Let me just grab a few things for the journey, Frizzy said with a glowing smile. The two boys made their way down to the courtyard and then out into the village of Toadfarts. They purchased some lemons and a bucket of slime and began marching down the path through the dark forest below the mountains. Let's have a song then, said Frizzy excitedly. All right. And unto us has come and gone, the spirit of the journey song. Let us away, let for me way, for us to fling our poop away. To be so young and brave at heart is like an enemy enslaved in part. For us to go so fleet of foot, it is important to see and spoot. Both the boys grasped each other's forearms and began spinning around frantically. Both smiling wider than ever before with saliva goozling and foozing from their mouths. Their tongues flinging back and forth. Garth grabbed Frizzy's face and used his teeth to chisel away at a tree to form two walking sticks like Frodo and Sam, and the two boys packed their belongings into the bladder which they had dried from a pig they had slain. They walked thither and thusly up the hill into deep into the forest and continued singing merrily. Suddenly, they were surrounded by goblin-like creatures who wanted nothing but evil tidings bestowed on them. You there, goblins? Let us pass, for we mean you no ill wishes. Garth said. We are not goblins, we are just very ugly and were kicked out of the wizard detective world because of our hideous appearance, and now we will have our vengeance. The leader of the uglies said.
If you make any noise, Frizzy, go for their legs while I leap into the bushes. While I am back there, steal a sword and chop all their heads off. I will sing the journey song in the trees to confuse them.
Before Frizzy could respond, one of the enemies came sprinting at the two boys. With a large sweep, the enemy spanked Garth on the side of the face. Garth fell back hard against a hill. Garth countered with a sturdy kick. It took the one ugly creature by surprise and killed it instantly. "Quickly! Over here!" yelled Frizzy. Frizzy had ran up to a lookout tower. Garth followed. They found themselves in a small rectangular tower with two small serpent-like statues at either side. "Let's each hide behind a statue. They will come searching for us and be none the wiser as to where we went," said Garth as he ducked behind the larger of the two statues. As the two boys sat and waited, they could hear their enemies gurgling and cursing as they searched. "They may have evaporated," said one. "No, they are in the Tower of the Serpents," said another. This took Garth by surprise. He was very frightened. He knew the enemies would be coming for them and him and Frizzy had little to no defense. Their journey could not end here. Garth knew he had a task to complete for Bun Bleskorf. As Garth fiddled with his own thoughts, he started to ripple his fingers around his bum. He was trying to scratch a wild itch. "I can hear them coming," said Frizzy. "They are coming closer and they will find us. You have been my best friend, Frizzy. When I have been scared you have been brave," said Garth as he could hear their enemies approaching their tower. Garth was so scared but still so itchy. He felt his fingers flounder to his bum, however he missed his bum and instead scratched the tail of the serpent. The serpent's tail hissed and caused the floor to the tower to open up. Garth and Frizzy went sliding down the tower. Garth and Frizzy slid for what seemed to be hours and then suddenly stopped. Garth rose to his feet and looked around. He had seen this place before. He was in the same dungeons that he was in when he had a dance-off with the dwarves. "Frizzy. How can this be? We traveled for hours and now we are back in Toadfarts," said Garth as he slowly walked down a dark passageway. Just then, the two boys heard many voices.
"Shh, Garth, shut up, shh."
Frizzy was right. Garth was approaching a large banquet hall which hundreds of voices coming from. Garth perched around the corner and looked in. He saw many of the ugly enemies he was previously fighting huddled around in circles visiting. At the middle of the hall was a podium. Surrounding the podium were thousands of frogs. Just then Frizzy fell through a trap door. He went flizzering down a rabbit hole and nearly broke his leg. He knew it was important to not distract Garth, so he used his walking stick like a slingshot and hoisted his toes against his pelvis and flung himself back to the surface. Garth turned around and swore at Frizzy. "Shush up," said Garth, "I am looking." Frizzy apologized and Garth kept looking at the great banquet hall. As he looked, a dark figure took the podium. The figure began to speak. "Dear friends, you have been so patient, and I thank you for that. However, our time is now. We have been waiting for his moment for years. Finally the curse has started to lift and it is time for us to regain power." The dark figure screamed and the entire crowd started to cheer. The figure speaking at the podium continued, "The chosen one, Garth Brown, is no longer at Toadfarts, which means it is now safe for us to take over." The crowd began cheering again as the figure stepped down from the podium. Garth couldn't make out its face, but he could make out one distinct feature. The dark figure had 1 leg and 2 feet. It was Professor Bun Bleskorf. A legend of the heroes, a cliffhanger that makes no sense. That is just how things go sometimes with our most beloved friends, Garth and Frizzy. I am Brian Longshanks and you have been listening to The Garth Brown Mysteries.